Humanity had always wondered what lay beyond the stars, but no one expected that the real universe would feel so crowded, loud, and full of politics. When Earth finally joined the wider galactic community, people believed it would be a peaceful new chapter. They hoped for learning, for collaboration, maybe even friendships with strange new species. And in the beginning, some of that actually happened. Humans were treated like newcomers, curious, unpredictable, still learning how things worked. But most of the major species looked at Earth like a small child running around in a room full of adults. They tolerated humans, but never took them seriously. That attitude didn't bother most people on Earth. Humanity was still excited. They were still exploring, still trying to understand what made each civilization unique. That was how they first met the Valoran. At first glance, the Valoran were unlike anything humans had ever seen. They were delicate in their movements, almost floating more than walking, and their soft voices had an almost musical tone. They looked fragile, but there was something warm and genuine in the way they spoke and listened. They didn't try to impress anyone. They didn't act superior. They treated humans as equals from the very first moment. The Valoran lived on a world filled with lush forests, glowing plants, and wide fields where their cities blended perfectly with nature. Their buildings seemed to grow out of the ground instead of being built. They had advanced ecological technology that could turn barren land fertile again, or heal an entire forest after a storm. Humans admired that deeply. But what touched them more was how peaceful the Valoran were. They avoided conflict whenever possible. They didn't maintain armies or war fleets. They never expected danger to reach them, and even if it did, they preferred diplomacy over force. Human researchers, scientists, and explorers spent months living among the Valoran to understand their world. They found themselves laughing with them, sharing stories, exchanging simple gifts, and watching glowing insects dance in the night skies. The Valoran were gentle, curious, and incredibly kind. They listened before speaking. They apologized even when the mistake wasn't theirs. And they showed deep respect to everyone, even strangers. It didn't take long for a bond to form. Humans had found something rare in the galaxy, a friendship that wasn't based on trade benefits or political strategy, but on genuine goodwill. The two civilizations exchanged knowledge, traditions, and even students. Kids from Earth learned about Valoran art and music. Valoran youth visited Earth, amazed by oceans, mountains, and how humans played sports with so much energy. Both sides felt enriched. But not everyone was happy about this growing connection. The Galactic Council watched quietly from a distance. They were the oldest political structure in known space, powerful and strict in their rules. They claimed to represent fairness and order, but everyone knew they disliked change, especially when it threatened their authority. The Council preferred when smaller civilizations stayed in their place, and to them, the Valoran were one of the weakest. They contributed little to the Council's military power. They had no influence, no strategic importance, and no desire for conflict. That made them easy to ignore. Yet suddenly, these irrelevant Valorans had gained Earth's friendship. And Earth, even though still new, brought innovation, military potential, and unpredictable ideas into the mix. The Council didn't like it. They didn't like how humans and Valorans spoke to each other as equals. They didn't like how the alliance made other species curious. And they definitely didn't like that Earth seemed willing to defend a peaceful species the Council considered insignificant. Humans sensed a quiet pressure from the Council. The meetings became colder. Diplomats noticed small, subtle warnings hidden inside polite words. Earth was told that it should be careful about forming emotional alliances too quickly. They were reminded that the Council maintained balance and that any new friendship should not disrupt existing structures. Those words felt harmless on the surface, but underneath, humans could feel a threat. Still, Earth didn't back down. The bond with the Valoran was real, and humans weren't the type to break friendships just because someone powerful frowned at them. If anything, the Council's coldness only made the bond stronger. Many humans felt protective toward the Valoran, almost like how one might protect a gentle neighbor from a group of bullies. They admired how the Valoran stayed hopeful, even when the galaxy around them acted harsh. The Valoran didn't understand politics very well. They believed if they behaved honestly, others would treat them fairly in return. With Earth beside them, they felt brave enough to ask the Galactic Council for something simple: recognition. They wanted equal rights, representation, and a chance to speak for themselves in major decisions. They were tired of being invisible in the room. Their requests seemed peaceful and reasonable, at least to humans. But the Council didn't see it that way. They saw a small, harmless species suddenly rising with confidence. They saw Earth supporting them, encouraging them to stand up. And the Council interpreted that as defiance. It began with whispers. Small rumors traveled through Council corridors. Diplomats from other species avoided discussing the Valoran openly. Something was being planned, something quiet and hidden behind official smiles. Earth's representatives sensed that something was wrong, but no one expected the danger to become so real so quickly. The Valoran prepared for their petition meeting with excitement. They even invited a few human observers to accompany them, not for negotiation, but for moral support. They hoped that having Earth there would show the Council that peaceful cooperation between species was possible. In the days leading up to the meeting, Valoran cities celebrated gently. They created new art, held small gatherings, and shared songs expressing hope for change. Humans watching these celebrations felt moved. They admired how the Valoran expressed courage with kindness instead of aggression. Many human observers kept saying that the galaxy needed more of this calm, respectful worldview, and that might have been the problem. The Council viewed all of this through a different lens. They believed that allowing a peaceful species to gain influence would encourage others. Smaller civilizations might begin to question old rules. They might demand fairness. They might challenge ancient power hierarchies. The Council didn't want that. They preferred a stable, predictable galaxy where everyone knew their place. Behind the scenes, meetings happened in secret rooms. Decisions were made in silence. And although nobody spoke openly, the atmosphere felt heavier each day. Earth's diplomats tried to gather information, but no one wanted to speak. The silence itself was a warning. Still, humans stayed hopeful. They told themselves that the galaxy wasn't so cruel, that the Council wouldn't cross certain lines. After all, the Valoran were peaceful, respectful, and harmless. Who would ever want to hurt them? The answer came far too soon. The day of the meeting arrived. The Valoran delegation walked into the Council chamber with their usual soft steps and gentle smiles. Their clothing shimmered with patterns symbolizing unity and healing. Human observers followed behind them, calm but alert. The chamber doors closed, sealing the room. No one knew that this moment would become the last peaceful memory humans had of the Valoran delegation. For a few minutes, things seemed normal. The Valoran presented their request politely, speaking from the heart. They expressed hope for equal participation and assured the Council that they sought only cooperation, not conflict. They thanked Earth for believing in them. The human observers felt proud, even touched. But under that quiet surface, tension crackled like hidden fire. The Council members exchanged looks cold, sharp, unreadable. They didn't argue. They didn't ask questions. They didn't negotiate. What happened next was hidden from public view. The chamber was sealed, recordings restricted, and official reports tightly controlled. But humans later received a small, broken transmission from one of the Valoran inside. The image was shaky, the voice weak, and the message short. Something had gone terribly wrong. Within hours, the Council released a statement claiming the Valoran. delegation had acted aggressively, causing an incident. They framed it as an accident tragic, unfortunate, but unavoidable. The council expressed sympathy, but offered no details. Earth immediately sensed the lie. The Valoran had never hurt anyone in their entire history. They wouldn't start now, and they certainly wouldn't provoke the most powerful organization in the galaxy. The truth began to leak in fragments. Human technicians recovered faint recordings. A few intercepted communications hinted at a much darker event. And one dying. Valoran envoy, barely conscious, managed to send a final message to humans. Earth listened. And what they learned changed everything. That moment, quiet, painful, unexpected, was the spark that would ignite humanity's anger. Not hatred, not revenge for pride, but outrage born from love for a gentle friend who never should have been harmed. The galaxy did not yet know it, but Earth had just crossed a line. They would not forget, they would not stay silent, and they would not let the Valorans stand alone ever again. When the doors of the council chamber closed behind the Valoran delegation, and the human observers, no one outside suspected that the room would become the center of a tragedy. People believed the meeting would be long and full of speeches, with debates and polite arguments. That was how the council usually handled things. Slow, formal, predictable. But this day unfolded in a way no one could have imagined. The Valorans started their petition with calm hearts. They spoke with gentle confidence, describing their simple wish to be recognized within the galaxy's political system. They talked about cooperation, shared growth, and peaceful progress. They were honest in every word. They didn't accuse anyone. They didn't push anyone. They only wanted to be heard. The human observers sat behind them, watching their soft gestures, their quiet strength. Many of the humans felt inspired. They admired how a peaceful species found courage to stand before the most powerful ruling body in the galaxy. It reminded them of how humanity once fought to be recognized back on Earth, how small communities had stood against mighty empires, holding nothing but truth and determination. But inside the council chamber, something felt wrong. The air was heavy. The council members did not seem impressed or even curious. Instead, they exchanged silent glances that carried unspoken messages. Their expressions were cold, almost irritated, as if the Valoran request had disrupted something far more important to them. As the Valoran finished speaking, a deep silence filled the room. Not the respectful kind. This silence felt like a warning. The human observers looked around, trying to read the mood, but everything felt unfamiliar. Something was off, but they couldn't point to what it was. One council member leaned forward and asked a simple question, one that sounded polite but carried a sharp undertone. Who encouraged you to make this petition? The Valoran delegates froze for a moment. They weren't expecting that. Their leader answered softly that no one encouraged them. They simply sought fairness. They added that Earth had supported them emotionally, but the decision to speak up was their own. That reply should have ended the tension. Yet it made things worse. Another council member stood up, voice firmer now, questioning why a species with no military strength suddenly wanted political influence. Their tone implied suspicion, almost hostility. The Valoran tried to assure them that they had no hidden agenda. They reminded the council that their people had lived peacefully for centuries and never caused conflict. But the council did not seem interested in peace. Their responses grew colder and shorter. It felt like they had already made a decision before the meeting even began. At one point, the human observers exchanged glances, quietly worried. They weren't allowed to speak during the initial session, but they wished they could reassure the Valoran, or at least clarify that Earth wasn't trying to manipulate anything. It was frustrating to sit silently and watch the atmosphere grow darker. Then something happened that humans would later replay in their memories again and again. A council abruptly ended the public dialogue. They claimed they required a private deliberation and ordered all observers, human or otherwise, to leave the chamber. The Valoran delegates, however, were asked to remain inside. That was strange. Normally, both sides stepped out so the council could discuss freely. But this time, only the Valoran were kept behind. The human observers protested politely, saying they wanted to stay with their friends, but the council guards firmly escorted them out. Once outside, the humans felt uneasy. They waited in the hallway, pacing, whispering, trying to stay calm. Minutes felt like hours. Nothing about this felt normal. Every instinct told them something was terribly wrong. Then the alarms went off. A sharp red glow filled the corridor. Sirens echoed through the halls in waves. Council guards ran past, shouting orders that made no sense. The humans tried to rush toward the chamber, but several guards blocked their path, pushing them back and telling them to stay put. The humans demanded answers. Was anyone hurt? Was something happening inside? But the guards refused to explain anything. They kept repeating that it was a containment situation. Containment of what? The humans waited helplessly, fear twisting in their stomachs. They didn't know what was happening to their Valoran friends behind those sealed doors. They tried contacting them through their small communication devices, but no messages came through. After what felt like forever, the doors opened. Council medical teams rushed out, carrying equipment. Behind them came armored guards with rifles powered up and glowing. The human observers tried to look inside the chamber, but the guards blocked the doorway. From that angle, all they could see were flickering lights and a haze of smoke. The humans shouted the name of the Valoran envoy they knew best. No answer came, not a voice, not even a faint sound. The entire hallway fell into a heavy silence again. Afterwards, the council released a formal announcement to the entire galaxy. They claimed that during the private session, the Valoran delegates had acted unpredictably and initiated a dangerous physical confrontation. According to the council, the chamber's automated defense systems reacted to protect everyone. The Valoran, they said, were tragically lost during the incident. The statement shocked the galaxy, but Earth didn't believe a single word. The explanation was too convenient, too vague, too strange. The Valoran were peaceful to their bones. They would never start a fight. Even in moments of fear, they always sought calm solutions. Human diplomats demanded footage, but the council refused, saying the events were classified. They refused to release audio logs, witness reports, or anything that might explain the details. They also refused to return the bodies of the Valoran delegation. That was when Earth realized something much darker had happened. A day later, a tiny broken signal reached one of the human observers. It was weak, full of static, almost impossible to understand. But it was enough. It was from one of the Valoran who had been inside the chamber. Their voice trembled as they spoke only a few words before the signal cut. The humans huddled around. The device, listening to the distorted message again and again, trying to hear every syllable. What they heard made their hearts stop. It wasn't an accident. They planned this. After that, the device went silent forever. Earth immediately launched its own investigation. Their intelligence teams dug through the Council's internal communication networks, intercepting encrypted messages. Engineers recovered fragments of audio and video from the chamber's damaged systems. None of the evidence was complete, but every piece pointed in the same direction. The Council had orchestrated the entire event. They had no intention of giving the Valoran equal representation. The meeting had been a trap, disguised as diplomacy. The Council didn't want a peaceful species standing beside Earth, asking uncomfortable questions or inspiring others to rise. They wanted to stop the Valoran's voice before it grew. Humans felt the news like a punch to the chest. People across Earth cried when they heard what happened. The Valoran were their friends, their gentle, kind, generous friends. They had never harmed anyone. They trusted too easily, believed too deeply in honesty, and entered the council chamber with hope. And for that hope, they paid the ultimate price. Human leaders called emergency meetings. They argued, debated, and struggled with anger that felt impossible to contain. Many said the council needed to be confronted immediately. Others wanted more proof before they acted. But everyone agreed on one thing. The truth had to come out. Even ordinary citizens felt the shock. People left flowers and glowing candles outside embassies. Artists painted murals of the Valoran. Schools held moments of silence. Everyone felt the weight of the loss, because the Valoran had touched humanity in ways no other species ever had. As more evidence leaked, one thing became clear. The council underestimated human emotion. They thought Earth would stay quiet, afraid to challenge them. They thought humans would accept the official report and move on. They didn't understand humanity at all. Earth mourned, but beneath that grief, something else began to rise, a quiet resolve, a determination that came from the soul. Humanity had stood by the Valoran in life. They would stand by them in death too. They would not let this injustice disappear into silence. And as humans pieced together the truth of what happened in that chamber, a new fire lit inside them, a fire that the galaxy had not seen before. When the message from the dying Valoran envoy reached Earth, it spread through human communication networks like a quiet storm. It wasn't a long message. It wasn't even clear. But the broken voice speaking those last words carried more weight than any official statement. Everyone who heard it felt the same sharp, cold shock. It wasn't an accident. Something terrible had been done on purpose. The first people to hear the recording were the human observers who had been at the council building. They sat around a small table in a dim room, listening again and again, hoping they had misunderstood. But they hadn't. Every replay sounded. The same weak breaths, a trembling voice, the desperation of someone who knew they had only seconds left to speak. One of the humans leaned back and covered their face, unable to handle the pressure in their chest. Another clenched their fists, shaking with frustration. No one spoke for a while because they didn't know what to say. The truth was too big, too heavy. They realized they were the last ones to hear the Valoran envoy alive, and this final message had been meant for them. For humanity, Earth's leaders were notified immediately. The recording was played in a secure hall where representatives, elders, and advisors sat with straight backs and stiff faces. When it ended, the room fell into complete silence. Some people stared at the table. Others looked up at the ceiling as if asking why. A few had tears in their eyes, but tried to hide them. A human diplomat finally broke the silence. They whispered, "We cannot let this go." That single sentence echoed the feeling of millions back home. When the news reached Earth's population, reactions were overwhelming. People who had met the Valoran cried openly. Those who had never met them felt heartbroken just from the stories they'd heard. The Valoran had been seen as gentle guests kind, soft-spoken friends who came to Earth with hope, offering songs instead of weapons, wisdom instead of orders. And now they were gone. Earth stations and colonies held public gatherings where people stood quietly, holding candles or soft lights in their hands. Videos were shared across networks showing Valoran art, their glowing gardens, their calm way of speaking. The galaxy had lost something precious, and humans felt that loss deeply. But grief wasn't the only emotion rising in people. Something stronger began to take shape beneath it, an emotion humans had carried through centuries, one that always awakened when injustice touched their hearts. It was anger, not wild anger, not mindless rage, but a deep, controlled anger that pushed people to act, to protect, to bring truth into the light. Earth's intelligence teams got to work immediately. They gathered every possible file, message, and sensor recording from the council building. They contacted other species who might have seen or heard anything unusual. They even accessed old, forgotten networks around the building in search of hidden footage. The work was slow and exhausting. Many files had been deleted. Many recordings had been damaged or locked behind secret encryption. But humans were persistent. They had a long history of uncovering what others tried to hide. And piece by piece, they began to build the real story. One of the first things they recovered was a list of council security orders, issued hours before the meeting. The orders were strangely detailed and included instructions to secure the chamber with extra guards and prepare the automated defense system. That was suspicious. Why prepare defensive measures for a peaceful meeting with a species that didn't even carry weapons? Another discovery came from a damaged hallway camera. The footage was blurred, but it showed council guards rushing into position minutes before the alarms went off. They didn't look surprised. They didn't look confused. They looked ready, like they had expected something. All these clues pointed toward the same conclusion. The meeting hadn't turned violent by accident. Something had been staged or planned. Someone had set things up so the Valoran delegation would be trapped, blamed, and silenced forever. Human technicians continued working long hours, barely sleeping. They wanted answers. They wanted proof. And then they found something that made their blood run cold, a small piece of audio from inside the council chamber. It was damaged, full of pops and static, but 2 seconds were clear enough. A voice said, "Proceed as ordered." No one inside the chamber should have been giving such an order in a peaceful negotiation. That small audio clip became Earth's strongest clue dot as the evidence grew. So did humanity's determination. People on Earth stopped accepting the Council's story. They stopped pretending that diplomacy could solve everything. The truth was too painful to ignore. A peaceful species had been targeted simply because they dared to ask for fairness. And humans took that personally. Human history had taught them many things, but one lesson stood above all. When someone harmed a friend, humans didn't walk away. They didn't stay silent. They didn't pretend it was fine. They spoke up. They stood firm. They defended what was right. Across Earth's cities, crowds began gathering. Not violent mobs, but peaceful groups holding signs, singing soft songs, or displaying Valoran symbols glowing in the night. They demanded the Council explain itself. They demanded justice. Other species across the galaxy started paying attention. They had always seen humans as emotional, unpredictable newcomers. But now they saw something different to unity they hadn't expected. Humanity wasn't just angry. Humanity was ready to act. Earth's leaders called a global broadcast. Billions of people watched from homes, streets, ships, colonies, and stations. The broadcast was simple. No dramatic effects, no flashing lights. Just a quiet room with a few representatives who spoke from the heart. One representative began by saying, "We have lost friends, and we refuse to accept lies in place of truth." They spoke about the Valoran, their kindness, their peaceful nature, the joy they brought into the galaxy. They described Earth's bond with them, how the two species had shared knowledge, culture, and dreams of a better future. Their voices shook with emotion, but they continued speaking clearly. Then they played the dying Valoran's final message. People across the galaxy listened in silence. Some cried. Some clenched their fists. Others closed their eyes, imagining the fear and pain the envoy must have felt. When the message ended, the representative spoke again. "We cannot change what has happened, but we can decide what happens next." That sentence sparked something powerful inside people. Earth didn't want revenge. They wanted truth. They wanted justice. They wanted to prevent anything like this from happening again to any species, anywhere. Soon after the broadcast, more intelligence reports confirmed Earth's suspicions. Messages between council officials showed irritation toward Earth-Valoran cooperation. Notes suggested that smaller species might start demanding rights if the Valoran succeeded. The messages grew darker, hinting that resolving the matter would protect the galaxy's balance. The pieces were falling into place. The Council had feared change. They had feared losing power. They had feared the friendship between Earth and the Valoran. And instead of discussing their fear, they acted in secret. Earth wasn't going to stay silent anymore. In human homes, people talked about what should be done. In schools, children asked why peaceful beings had been hurt. Teachers answered honestly, saying sometimes the world wasn't fair, but fairness could be fought for. On social networks, millions of messages flowed every hour, messages of grief, support, and unity. Earth's military leaders met quietly in hidden rooms. They studied the situation carefully. They didn't want war, but they also couldn't trust the Council anymore. The galaxy had changed forever. The peace that humans once imagined now felt like a dream slipping away. Yet humans were not lost in sadness. They were not broken. They were becoming stronger. A determination began to form, a firm belief that the Valoran deserved justice, that the truth had to be revealed to everyone, and that no powerful organization could erase a gentle species without consequences. As the days passed, Earth's resolve solidified into a clear purpose. They would uncover the full truth. They would show the galaxy what really happened. And they would protect the remaining Valoran, survivors with everything they had. The galaxy had underestimated humanity's heart. But now, the entire star system was about to learn what humans did when someone tried to silence a peaceful friend. This was no longer just a tragedy. This was the beginning of something far bigger. The days after her unbelievable performance moved slowly, but felt strangely heavy. The young woman kept replaying the moment in her mind, the way the hall had fallen silent, the way the billionaire had wiped his eyes, the way people had looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and admiration. It all felt unreal, like a scene from a dream she wasn't sure she was allowed to have. She didn't talk about it with anyone. Not the other staff, not the guests, not even herself. She tried to continue her work, the way she always did, quiet, humble, keeping to her tasks. But something had changed inside her. Every time she walked past the piano now, she felt a strange pull. It was like the instrument recognized her, like it was waiting for her fingers again. But she avoided it. Not because she didn't want to play. She avoided it because playing had awakened something she didn't know she had buried so deeply. Memory of her old dream, the one she had given up long ago out of necessity. As she moved through the mansion's long corridors with trays, towels, and tea sets, she noticed that people stared at her differently now. Not in a rude way, but with curiosity. Even the security guards, who rarely looked up from their stations, gave her small nods as she passed. One afternoon, while she was polishing the silverware in the dining hall, she overheard two guests talking. They didn't know she was nearby. "Is she the one who played at the gala?" one asked. "Yes," the other whispered. "The quiet girl from the staff. Apparently, she never trained formally, but did you see how she played?" Even the host cried. "I don't blame him," the first replied softly. "It was something else." Hearing their words made her cheeks warm, but it also made her uneasy. She didn't want attention. She didn't know what to do with praise. She had lived most of her life being unseen. Now suddenly being noticed felt overwhelming. That evening, the billionaire returned to the mansion. He had been away for a few days because of business, but everyone knew he had been thinking about the event. He was a man known for his sharp observations and quick decisions, so no one was surprised when he asked his assistant to call the young woman to his study. She stood outside the door for a while before knocking. Her hands were shaking. She didn't know what he wanted. Maybe she had accidentally embarrassed him. Maybe he didn't like the attention her performance had brought. Maybe he didn't want staff being in the spotlight. When she finally knocked, a calm voice invited her inside. He was sitting behind a large wooden desk, going through a stack of documents. The room smelled of books and old leather, with soft light falling from a tall lamp. He looked up when she walked in. "Come," he said gently. "Sit." She hesitated, unsure if she should, but he nodded again. "I wanted to talk to you," he started, studying her face. "First, I want to thank you. What you did that night. I don't think I've ever heard anything like it." She clasped her hands together and lowered her head. "I didn't expect anything to happen that night," she admitted quietly. "I just played." "Exactly," he replied. "You played from your heart. And that is rare." She didn't know how to respond. After a short pause, he leaned back in his chair and asked, "Tell me, how did you learn? Who taught you?" The question made her chest tighten. She hadn't spoken about that part of her life for years. But he asked with such sincerity that she felt she could give him at least a piece of the truth. "I learned as a child," she said softly. "My mother. She used to work at a small cultural center. There was an old piano there that no one used. I would sit there after school, and she would show me simple notes. Later, I taught myself. But we couldn't afford classes." The billionaire listened carefully, his expression thoughtful. "You played like someone who trained for decades," he said. "That's not something you can learn alone." She smiled faintly. "Music was the only place I felt free." He nodded slowly, and then he said something that startled her. "Would you like to learn again? Properly?" Her breath caught. She shook her head quickly. "No, sir. I work here. I can't, and I don't have—" He raised a hand gently, stopping her. "I'm not asking about money," he said. "I'm asking about your dream. If you could study with real teachers, if you could practice on real instruments, would you want that?" Her eyes filled with emotion she didn't understand. It felt like her life had paused. She wanted to say yes immediately. Her heart screamed it. But something heavier pulled her back. "I can't," she said after a moment. "I'm responsible for my job. I have people depending on me. I can't just chase dreams. Not anymore." The billionaire looked at her in silence for a few moments. "It's hard to let yourself want something," he said softly, "especially after life teaches you to stop wanting." Those words struck her clearly, almost painfully. He didn't push her further. Instead, he stood up and walked to the window. "There's a new charity event happening next month," he said casually, as if discussing the weather. "A lot of influential people will be attending. They've asked for a pianist. I told them I might know someone." Her heart dropped. I can't perform again," she whispered. "That night was different. It just happened. I don't think I can do it again." He turned toward her slowly. "You don't have to decide now," he said. "Just think about it." She nodded nervously. She didn't want more attention. She didn't want pressure. But deep inside, something fluttered, something that felt like hope. Before she left the room, he added one last line that stayed with her long after she walked out. "Some talents are too big to stay hidden forever." After that conversation, weeks passed quietly. She continued her duties, but her mind often wandered. Sometimes she found herself near the piano with no reason. She would touch the keys lightly, playing a note or two when no one was around. Every time she did, she felt the weight of the billionaire's words echoing inside her. One late evening, when almost everyone had left, she found herself alone in the hall. The piano stood under a soft golden light, the lid partly open as if inviting her. She looked around to make sure no one was near, then sat down gently. Her hands hovered above the keys. She didn't have music sheets. She didn't have a plan. She just let her fingers move the way they wanted. The melody that came out was soft, slow, and full of emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel for years. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't meant to be. It was honest. She didn't know the billionaire was standing in the shadows near the doorway. He had come looking for something he left in the hall, but instead, he stopped when he heard the quiet notes filling the room. He watched her play so absorbed, so unaware of the world around her. And he realized something very clearly in that moment. She wasn't just talented. She was born for this. When she finally finished and stood up quickly, brushing her uniform nervously, she froze when she saw him quietly stepping forward. "I'm sorry," she said instantly. "I didn't know anyone was." "You play," he interrupted softly, like someone who carries a whole story inside her. She lowered her eyes, embarrassed. He walked closer, his voice calm and gentle. "I won't force you to perform," he said, "but I believe you're capable of more than you allow yourself to dream." Her eyes welled up again, and she looked away, wiping them quickly. That night, as she lay in her small room, staring at the ceiling, she realized she was standing at a crossroads. One path was safe, familiar, quiet, the life she knew. The other path was uncertain, frightening, overwhelming, but bright in a way she hadn't felt since childhood. For the first time in a very long time, she didn't fall asleep quickly. Her heart stayed awake, whispering possibilities she wasn't ready to speak aloud. But she knew one thing for sure. Story wasn't finished yet, and something was coming that would change everything again. The month passed faster than she expected. Every day felt like a quiet battle inside her. She tried to focus on cleaning rooms, arranging utensils, ironing table covers, and all the small tasks she was responsible for, but her mind kept drifting back to the piano. It happened naturally sometimes during lunch break, sometimes late at night, sometimes even when she was doing something completely unrelated. She didn't know whether she should accept the billionaire's offer to perform at the charity event. The thought alone made her heart race. She was terrified of people watching her again, judging her, expecting something extraordinary. What if she failed? What if that first performance was just luck? What if she couldn't recreate it? But deep inside, beneath all the fear, was a tiny spark and excitement she had never allowed herself to feel as an adult. A small part of her wanted to try again. Not to impress anyone, not to gain attention, but simply because playing made her feel alive in a way nothing else ever did. She didn't tell anyone about her confusion. She kept it inside her like a secret she wasn't ready to share. One afternoon, while she was setting the table in the main dining hall, the billionaire's assistant approached her. He carried a calm smile, the kind that made people feel comfortable. "The event is coming up," he said gently. "Sir asked me to check if you made a decision." She froze for a second, holding a stack of folded napkins in her hands. I'm still thinking," she replied quietly. "There's no rush," he assured her. "But if you choose to do it, he wants you to have time to prepare. He doesn't want to throw you onto a stage without support." She nodded and returned to her task. The assistant didn't pressure her. He simply gave her a small smile and walked away. But his words stayed in her mind. Time to prepare. Support. These were things she never had before. That evening, after her shift, she walked into the garden behind the mansion. It was a peaceful place with small stone pathways, trimmed bushes, and soft lights that glowed warmly in the evening air. She sat on a bench and took a deep breath, staring at the sky. She remembered all the years she spent waiting tables in small cafes, scrubbing floors, carrying heavy trays, waking up early, and going to bed exhausted. Every time life became too heavy, she told herself to be grateful for what she had. And she was, but sometimes being grateful meant she stopped dreaming. She thought of her mother, of those old evenings in the little cultural center when they sat together by the dusty piano. She remembered how her mother would smile proudly after she played even the simplest tune. Those memories were soft, warm, and painful at the same time. Like sunlight filtered through tears. Sitting in the garden, she whispered quietly, "What do I do?" There was no answer, of course. Only the cool breeze brushing against her face. But something inside her shifted that night. She didn't know why. Maybe the quiet helped her think. Maybe she was tired of being afraid. Maybe the memory of her mother felt stronger than the fear of failing. Whatever the reason, she made a decision, not loudly, not dramatically. It was a small decision, made in her heart, calm and honest. She would try. Not because she thought she was good enough, but because she didn't want to live her whole life wondering, what if? The next morning, she went to the study where the billionaire usually worked. She waited until he looked up from his files. He gave her a warm, patient smile. "Have you decided?" he asked gently. She nodded slowly. I want to play at the event." His smile widened, genuine and almost relieved. "Good. I'm glad you chose that. I promise, you won't be alone in this." She felt nervous even after saying it out loud, but the kindness in his voice calmed her. The preparations began the next day. The billionaire arranged for a music teacher to visit the mansion, someone who was calm, soft-spoken, and experienced with guiding students without overwhelming them. The teacher introduced himself politely and treated her with respect, not like a worker, not like someone untrained, but like a person who had real potential. Their first session was simple. He asked her to play anything she wanted. She was shy at first, but once her fingers touched the keys, the fear began to fade. The teacher didn't rush her or interrupt. He listened carefully and nodded with approval. "You play with emotion," he told her. "Technique can be improved. Emotion cannot be taught. You already have the hardest part." His words made her smile, something she hadn't done easily in a long time. Every day after her work, she practiced for an hour or two, sometimes even longer when no one was around. The teacher guided her on posture, breathing, and confidence. He chose a piece that matched her style, soft, flowing, full of feeling. It wasn't the hardest piece, but it was perfect for her. The billionaire checked on her progress often, always from a respectful distance. He never pressured her, never demanded perfection. He simply encouraged her gently. His words were simple but powerful. "You're doing well. Believe in your hands. You were born for this." Days turned into weeks. Her confidence grew little by little. She wasn't perfect, but she was steady. She wasn't fearless, but she was stronger than before. One evening, after a long practice session, she sat alone in the hall, breathing heavily but smiling. Her fingers ached a little, but in a satisfying way. She felt proud of herself, not because she played flawlessly, but because she kept going even when she was scared, but even with all the progress. The night of the event approached faster than she expected. When the final week arrived, her nerves returned heavier than ever. She couldn't sleep properly. Her hands felt cold. She worried all the time. What if she disappointed everyone? What if she froze on stage? What if she wasn't meant for this after all? The billionaire noticed her stress. One evening, he invited her for a walk outside the mansion. The air was cool, and the sky was dark with tiny stars scattered across it. "You're thinking too much," he said gently. She lowered her eyes. "I'm afraid. Do you know why you're afraid?" He asked. "Because people will be watching," she whispered. "No," he said softly. "You're afraid because you care. Fear only comes when something matters to you. And this matters." His words made her stop walking. She looked at him with tired eyes. "What if I fail?" He smiled, slow and calm. "Then you try again. Failing doesn't erase talent. And it doesn't erase courage. She didn't reply, but something inside her felt lighter when the night of the charity event finally arrived. She stood backstage in a simple but elegant dress the assistant had helped her pick. Nothing too fancy, nothing too bright, just enough to make her look like a musician rather than a staff member. The hall was filled with people dressed in beautiful clothes, talking, laughing, greeting each other. Music played softly through the speakers. The scent of fresh flowers filled the air. She peeked from behind the curtain and felt her heart drop to her stomach. There were so many people. Too many. Her hands began to shake. The billionaire approached her quietly. He placed a reassuring hand near her shoulder, not touching her, but standing close enough that she felt supported. "Just breathe," he said. "You're ready." She took a slow breath. "Remember," he added softly, "you're not here to impress anyone. You're here to share a part of yourself. That's all." Those words settled inside her, calm and grounding. When her name was announced, not as a staff member, but as the pianist for the evening, the crowd turned their attention to the stage. She stepped out slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. But when she reached the piano and sat down, a strange silence fell over her. It was just her, the keys, and the quiet humming of her own heartbeat. She placed her fingers on the piano and closed her eyes for a moment. She pictured her mother, smiling softly beside the old cultural center piano. She pictured the billionaire's words, the teacher's gentle guidance, her own nights of fear and effort. And then she began to play. The first notes were soft, almost trembling. But slowly, steadily, her confidence grew. The melody flowed through the hall like warm light. People stopped whispering. Some leaned forward. Some closed their eyes. Some simply listened with gentle smiles. She played with her whole heart. Every memory, every struggle, every hope hidden inside her came out in the notes. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, beautiful, and full of life. By the time she finished, the hall was completely silent, and then the applause began, slow at first, then louder, then rising to a warm, heartfelt wave. She looked up, breathless, almost in disbelief. The billionaire stood among the crowd, clapping with pride in his eyes. In that moment, she felt something she had never felt before. She belonged, and for the first time in many years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her life was about to change forever. When the applause finally faded, she sat there for a few seconds, unsure if she should stand up or stay seated. Her heart was beating so fast that she could hear it in her ears. The lights felt brighter than before, and her hands trembled slightly, but this time it wasn't fear. It was relief. It was joy. It was the feeling of someone breaking free from a life they never thought they could escape. Slowly, she stood from the piano bench. People in the audience kept clapping, some smiling with genuine warmth, some nodding in admiration. A few even whispered to the people sitting next to them, trying to express how touched they were. She had never been the center of attention before. She had always been the quiet one, the unnoticed one. But today, people were looking at her with respect. She gave a small bow, shy but sincere, then stepped away from the piano. As soon as she walked backstage, she let out a breath she had been holding for too long. She leaned against the wall, laughing quietly to herself out of pure relief that her music teacher approached her first, clapping gently. "You did it," he said with a warm smile. "You played from your heart. That's what real music is." She smiled back, feeling tears forming in her eyes. "Thank you for helping me." "You helped yourself," he replied softly. "I only guided you." Before she could say anything more, the billionaire stepped in through the curtain. His expression wasn't the usual calm, collected look she had seen before. He looked proud, truly proud, not of the performance alone, but of her courage. "You were wonderful," he said, walking closer, but not too close, giving her space. You held the entire room without saying a single word. She lowered her eyes shyly. I was scared. Of course you were, he said kindly. Everyone who does something meaningful feels fear. But you didn't let the fear stop you. That is what people will remember. She didn't know how to respond. For a moment, she simply stood there, letting the truth of his words sink in. The assistant came next, excited and cheerful. People are asking about you. They want to know who you are, where you learned, everything. You became the highlight of the night. Her face turned red. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, the billionaire said gently. Just breathe. The rest will come later. They guided her to a quiet corner backstage, where she could sit and relax. A small glass of water was placed in her hand. She held it with both palms, trying to steady herself. Her hands still shook lightly, not with fear now, but with leftover adrenaline. As she sipped the water, she heard the soft murmur of the audience outside. The event continued, but something had changed. People kept looking toward the stage, still thinking about her performance. The music she played had reached them not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. After a few minutes, the billionaire's assistant told her that some guests wanted to meet her, but only if she felt comfortable. She hesitated. Meeting strangers always made her nervous, especially important or wealthy people. But she also knew this might be a moment she would never experience again. She nodded slowly. The assistant smiled and led her out to a small reception area. A few guests approached her, one at a time, not in a crowded rush, but gently, politely. They complimented her playing, telling her how touched they felt. One woman said she had been going through something difficult in her life, and hearing the music gave her a moment of peace. Another person said they hadn't expected someone so young and quiet to fill the entire hall with emotion. Every compliment made her blush. She answered softly, thanking them, trying not to feel overwhelmed. For the first time in her life, people weren't dismissing her. They weren't ignoring her. They weren't laughing. Instead, they were inspired by her. But the most important moment came much later, after the crowd thinned and the event ended. She went to the dressing room to gather her things. She changed out of the dress and slipped back into her simple clothes. Even then, she still felt like a different person, someone lighter, someone braver. As she walked out of the room, she found the billionaire waiting quietly in the hallway. He wasn't rushing her. He wasn't giving orders. He was simply standing there with a calm expression. She approached him slowly. You did something brave tonight, he said. She looked down at her hands. I'm just glad I didn't make a mistake. He gave a light, warm laugh. Even if you did, it wouldn't have mattered. People didn't love your performance because it was perfect. They loved it because it was real. She felt her eyes sting a little. It was rare for someone to speak to her like that, with honesty, without judgment. You know, he continued, you have a gift.